Today's video, we're going to get into the actual models that the Keynesian economists believed in. But before we do that, I want to take a quick step back and show why we got to where we are. And what we're going to do right now, to me, is very critical because it's showing the motivation for why Keynes is going to do what he's going to do in today's lecture. So this is the market for loanable funds that we have seen a good bit now. And this is how classical economists viewed this market. The market would operate at equilibrium. If someone saves some money, suddenly somebody comes into this market and saves it, that savings curve would increase, leading to a lower interest rate, because after all, the classical economists assumed that the market for loanable funds would have flexible interest rates, and the quantity would maintain equilibrium just at a new equilibrium quantity. So the end result, and why this is so important, is for the classical economists, if I spend my money, it's spent, of course. But also, if I save my money, it's also spent. If I save my money and enters this market, okay, interest rates adjust to account for exactly how much money is coming in and exactly the amount of labor or demand for loanable funds. So the borrower's curve, if that shifts or the saver's curve shifts, it's always going to calibrate to reach the equilibrium. So my money gets saved, borrowed, and then spent by the borrower. So if I save my money, it is borrowed and spent. Thus, because of this, then all earnings will be spent. Thus, production creates consumption. Which is Say's law, right? Supply will create its own demand. So production will create its own consumption. And so for the classical economists, all you got to do is just focus on production. And that's why there's so much of a focus on aggregate supply in their graphs, and aggregate demand is pretty much ignored for the most part. So that's the way the classical viewed it. The way Keynes views it is quite different. So let's start back over here in the market for loanable funds. And let's imagine, honestly, this is probably not what Keynes would believe in, but let's just imagine that the interest rates do calibrate to equilibrium initially. So let's imagine this is where we are to begin with, which is probably not what he would believe in. As we mentioned in a prior video, if we're at equilibrium, that would mean that every dollar saved is borrowed, which would mean the banks don't have any money because they've loaned all the money that they have out, which we know is unrealistic. Anyway, this is what Keynes basically was concerned with, that if someone saves their money, just like we showed before, then maybe this market would not reach an equilibrium. Instead, maybe we have sticky interest rates. Maybe interest rates do not adjust. Maybe they're not flexible. If that's the case, all right, I'm going to erase this old savers curve here. If that's the case, then what would occur here is the quantity saved would be significantly more than the quantity borrowed. And what this would mean is if I spend my money, it all gets spent. Okay, so that's no different between Keynes and classical in that regard. Right? There's really nothing to discuss there. If I spend my money, of course it's spent. But if I save my money, it may not be spent. All right, it may not be spent because this market may not have flexible interest rates. And furthermore, we know that banks are going to hold on to some of the money that they have. So the way Keynes views this is, if I spend $10,000, that's going to enable $10,000 of GDP consumed. But if I save $10,000, well, maybe only $8,000 of that gets spent, right? A couple of grand stays in the bank. So for Keynes, here's the bottom line. people increase saving, think about how that would affect the economy. People are spending a lot and then they start saving more and spending less, then that's going to harm the economy because it's going to reduce the amount of consumption, right? So if I'm spending all the money I have and suddenly I start saving 20 grand, that's actually going to hurt the economy because there's going to be less spending, right? Because not all of my 20 grand gets borrowed and spent. So if people increase savings, that would hurt the economy. So for Keynes, the key variable to a healthy economy is consumption or demand. Same thing, really, right? Demand and consumption really show the same thing. If the economy is weak, the government might need to get involved to try to stimulate more spending, according to Keynes. Okay? So that's why all of his focus in his models is going to be on consumption. That's what we're going to be focusing on in Chapter 10. So we've seen why he disagrees with the key assumptions, and the assumptions of flexible interest rates is the real critical one that he doesn't believe in, and that's why he is so interested in consumption. Remember that Keynes feels that people exhibit animal spirits. They're kind of unpredictable. And if they're unpredictable in regards to consumption, then the economy can be unpredictable too. Meaning, if we don't know how much people are going to spend next year, then the economy next year could do really well or really poorly, depending on consumption, which is unpredictable. That's where the economic instability that Keynes talks about comes from. So let's erase all of this and let's get to Keynes's model. This is kind of the second section of this chapter, begins here. So this is the simple Keynesian model as it is described in the book. The simple Keynesian model. Okay, so remember, Keynes is interested in consumption, and here are his 3 key points on consumption. Taking this right out of the book. Remember that Keynes is not too infatuated with the idea of building assumptions, because assumptions can be tough. If people exhibit animal spirits, that by nature means that they're unpredictable. But he thinks that we can at least learn a little bit about the way people behave, generally speaking. So it's hard to predict what an individual is going to do, but if we think about everybody in society, we can make some general inferences about people's behavior. So for example, number 1 is that consumption depends on disposable income. Okay, and we're going to have to give some terminology as we go through each of these key points. We know what consumption is, right? That's just general consumer spending. Disposable income, that's something that you've heard of. That's something you probably have used in your own terminology before. But we need to make sure we understand what Keynes means by disposable income. It's actually a little bit complicated, but it makes a lot of logical sense. So I'm going to give you a couple of terms here to describe this. The first is something called autonomous consumption. Autonomous consumption. If something is done autonomously, it's generally done without much extra thought or without a great deal of additional consideration. Meaning, if I wake up every morning and take my dog on a walk, I may get to the point where I do it autonomously. I don't even think, should I or shouldn't I take my dog on a walk? I just get up and do it, right? Brushing my teeth at night, it's autonomous. I don't really have to think, should I brush my teeth? I just do it, right? It's automatic, it's autonomous. So for Keynes, autonomous consumption is the consumption that we do really without much additional thought or consideration. So this is consumption consumers do without much discretion. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. Without much discretion. And this is kind of a hard concept because it's so unique to every consumer. A lot of times when we think about autonomous consumption, we think about necessities, and certainly some necessities this would be true for. So for example, probably a good example for you guys is rent. You don't think about should you be paying your rent or not. You do it autonomously, right? You know, when your rent is due, you don't think, should I buy rent this month or not? You probably don't think that way. You just pay it. It's become something you automatically do. Perhaps the same thing with potentially with things like your water bill or your power bill. They may be autonomous to a degree too. That being said, if your income goes up, you may actually consume more electricity, so it may not be purely autonomous. If something is purely autonomous, it's separate from your income, in the sense that if your income goes up, you keep buying the same amount. Another good example for me, this is, again, it's unique for different people, so I'm going to tell you guys about me, because I can't get into your head and know what's autonomous for you. But medications to me are autonomous, specifically prescription meds. Meaning, if I go to the doctor and the doctor says, look, you've got an infection, we need to give you some antibiotics, I don't think to myself, well, should I buy the antibiotics or not? No, it's autonomous. I go to the pharmacy and I say, I'm buying these. I don't even ask what the price is, right? I just pay for it. So it's autonomous to me because I don't put any extra thought into it. For me, Netflix is autonomous. I don't think, should I be buying Netflix next month? I just pay for it every single month. It doesn't even cross my mind, to be honest. In fact, this is so autonomous that it auto-drafts out of my bank account. I don't even physically pay it. It happens automatically. So that's a really good example of something that's autonomous for me. The thing to recognize, though, is something like Netflix, this is not a necessity. So when I've had students in the past get confused about this, they think autonomous consumption is just necessities. It's really not. It's whatever you spend autonomously. For me, my family vacation is actually autonomous in the sense that I'm going to go every year, and we're going to stay probably at the same place every year, and I'm going to pay for a week vacation at the beach. So, paying that $1,500 to have a place on the beach is something that's actually become autonomous to me because we do it every year. But it's certainly not a necessity, right? So that's autonomous consumption. It's the things you do pretty much automatically that you don't think, should you or shouldn't you spend it. The key thing to recognize about autonomous consumption and why it's different from the other things you consume is there's really no way to change this. There's not really any way to change autonomous consumption. And in fact, if it does change, then by nature it's not autonomous. Meaning, if I decide I don't want to have Netflix anymore and I stop paying for it, well then Netflix wasn't autonomous consumption for me because I'm not doing it automatically. So there's no way for this to change. So this is important because we can't do anything about this. If the government wants to try to boost consumption, it should just ignore autonomous consumption because it's fixed. It's already done. People don't think about it. So, there was a lot of discussion to get to the term that we initially wanted to hit here, which is disposable income. Disposable income, according to Keynes, is the income you have left over after your autonomous consumption. So this is after you pay for those autonomous things. After you pay for your cable and your internet and your Netflix and your rent, after you pay for your insurance perhaps, right? Things like that. After you pay for your insurance, after you've paid your taxes, after you've paid for all that stuff that you're just going to definitely pay for, this is the money you have left over. Your disposable income is your money after all of that autonomous consumption takes place. And the reason why Keynes wants to focus on this is because disposable income represents your choice, okay? This is the money you're going to choose, that you can choose to spend or save. maybe I make $6,000 a month, and maybe I spend $5,500 of it autonomously, okay? That's going to happen automatically. What Keynes is wondering is, what am I going to do with that leftover $500? That's where all the action is, because there's where my decision comes in. I can choose to spend or save that money. And if the government wants to stimulate the economy, what it needs to try to do is figure out a way to get people to spend more of this money. Okay? So this is the focus. Disposable income is very crucial to deciding how much total spending people are going to do. Okay, so all Keynes is saying here, to get back to our key point number 1, consumption depends on disposable income. All he's saying here is something very simple. He's basically just saying that people's spending will be affected by their disposable income. Meaning, if you gave everybody in the United States 10 grand right now, that would be 10 grand in disposable income, right? It's got to be disposable income because they've already done their autonomous consumption. That's already fixed. So this is going to be brand new money to them. All Keynes is saying is if you give every American $10,000, consumption is going to change because of that. It's a very general, very simple thing that he's saying here. Because remember, Keynes doesn't make a lot of assumptions because people exhibit animal spirits. All right, so that's number 1. Number 2. Again, this is coming straight out of the book. Number 2, he's saying that consumption and disposable income are positively correlated. Not making any groundbreaking assumptions or declarations here. This is very clear and very simple. All he's saying here is if you have more disposable income, that's going to lead to more spending, more consumption. Okay? More disposable income, more consumption. And I'm just going to add a little note here for society as a whole. Individuals don't necessarily have to do this, but he's saying for society as a whole, this is going to occur. If everyone has more disposable income, then total spending for society is going to go up. Very simple thing to say. So that's number 2. And then the final assumption that he makes here in his 3 points on consumption is that when disposable income changes, consumption changes by a smaller amount. A pretty simple idea. And he's focusing on society, not individuals. Individuals don't have to follow this rule, but for society, they will. Okay? So when disposable income changes, consumption changes by a smaller amount. Let me show you what this looks like. So let's imagine that 5 people are given $1,000 each, suddenly and unexpectedly, okay? If they're given that money unexpectedly, then this is clearly going to be disposable income because it's going to be money they didn't know they were going to have. Couldn't be spent autonomously because autonomous consumption is already happening. So if more money comes in, it's by nature has to be disposable income. So let's imagine there are 5 people here. And each of them, again, gets $1,000 in new disposable income. Okay? What Keynes thinks is going to happen with a big group of people is that it's going to exhibit everything that you saw in those 3 key points that we just discussed. So new spending, new consumption. Maybe person number 1 doesn't spend any money. They get the $1,000 and they don't spend any of it. Is that possible? Of course it's possible, right? It's possible that they get that $1,000 and they say, you know what? I'm going to take it to the bank. right? I'm not going to spend any of it. I need to save, so I'm going to save it. I'm going to take it to the bank, or I'm going to buy stocks, something like that. So that's very possible. It's also possible that some people, like person number 2 here, spends all of the money, right? I think we all have friends that would do that with the money. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what I would do too. You get $1,000 and you say, well, this is money I wasn't expecting to get. I'm just going to spend all of it, right? I'm going to buy a TV or something. And then some people are going to do a little bit of maybe an amount that's in between, right? Maybe they spend half, save half. Maybe they spend almost all of it, you know, or maybe they spend just a little bit of it. All Keynes is saying here is that individuals, when their disposable income goes up, it's hard to predict what they're going to do. But when you think about a big group of people, it becomes a lot simpler to think about what people are going to do in aggregate. Okay? Because remember, we're talking about the overall economy. We're talking about aggregate demand. So looking at this at the micro level is not going to be something we're going to do beyond what you see right here. Okay? Individuals, again, they don't have to follow the 3 key points on consumption. Remember, the 3 points on consumption are basically saying that disposable income causes consumption, that they rise together, and that when disposable income goes up, consumption goes up by a smaller amount. These 2 consumers here are breaking those rules, right? This person's spending is not based on disposable income at all. And this person is spending all of their money, which breaks that 3rd key point on consumption. But if you take everyone together in aggregate, we've got $5,000 in new disposable coming in. We've got, let's see, $2,400, $2,600 in new spending. So if you take everyone in aggregate, they're going to follow those 3 key points that Keynes made. And that's what he's suggesting, okay? That society as a whole is somewhat predictable. And so the next thing he does is he models consumption using those key 3 points as a guide. And so here is the very quick little model that he creates. Remember, this is his simple model, and the logic here is pretty simple. All right, we've got C equals C naught. That's C with a little 0 next to it, pronounced C naught. MPC, and then YD. You've actually seen all of these. This is the new one here, but let me lay these out. C is total consumption. Total consumption for a person or for society. C naught is autonomous consumption. Which we've seen before. Okay, I'm going to skip this one and come back to it because YD is the other one you've seen. YD is just going to be disposable income. If you recall back in chapter 7, I believe, we showed that Y is GDP and Y is also total income for society. So Y is income, little d is standing for that disposable. And then MPC is the marginal propensity to consume, which sounds so much fancier than it really is. The marginal propensity to consume. Okay, so we need to explain this marginal propensity to consume. So let me give myself some room here. Pretty easy idea, to be honest. MPC shows the willingness a consumer has to spend their disposable income. Okay? Shows a willingness a consumer has to spend their disposable income. Okay? If MPC is higher, that means consumers are spending a lot of their disposable income. If it's low, that means they're spending very little. So the way we could think about this in a formula is MPC represents the change in consumption in response to, divided by, a change in disposable income. And let's not make this complicated because it feels complicated. There's fancy words in there like propensity. This is a really simple idea, okay? All this is saying is that, for example, let's say that I earn $2,000 in disposable income and I spend $1,000 of it. In that case, the MPC would be the change in consumption. I'm going to write that, okay? The change in consumption, this $1,000 here, divided by my change in disposable income, my new earnings here, which comes out to 0.5. And all this 0.5 means is that basically I spend 50% of my disposable income. Or in other words, if you give me $1, I'm going to spend 50 cents of it. Okay? So I will spend 50 cents of the next dollar I earn. Okay? So if you give me $1 and this is my MPC, again, I'm going to spend 50 cents of it. It's the marginal propensity to consume. Marginal because it's trying to focus on the very next dollar, right? Remember rational decisions are made at the margins and all that stuff? If you give me one more dollar, MPC is going to show you what I'm going to do with it. Propensity just means likelihood, right? How likely you are to do something. So this is saying marginal likelihood to consume. How likely are you to spend that next dollar that you get? Okay? I'm going to spend about 50% of it, about 50 cents. So that's one example. What if you spend all of it? If you spend all of your disposable income, then what would the MPC be? All right? Well, that would mean that as my disposable income changes, my consumption would change by exactly the same amount. So this and this would be the same. We'd get an MPC equal to 1. If you spend none of it, right? If you spend none of your disposable income, that means if you get new money coming in, your consumption would change by 0. So you get 0 divided by whatever your change in disposable income is. So you get an MPC of 0. Those are the extremes. MPC can go from 0 to 1 for individuals. Okay? MPC can go from 0 to 1 for individuals. Okay, so let me give you one quick question here just to make sure you understand this. One more example. Let's say that I find $1,000 on the ground and I spend $300 of it. If that's the case, the MPC would be 300 divided by 1,000, which is 0.3. Okay? And all that means is, if you're going to give me $1 right now, I'm probably going to spend about 30 cents of that dollar, of that new money. So that's MPC. We also have something called marginal propensity to save. And I think you can imagine what that's going to tell us. This is the likelihood to save your disposable income. The likelihood of saving disposable income. And hopefully this is going to seem a little easier to you if you understand MPC right away. And if you don't understand MPC, I'd stop now and read the book, go back and watch the 10 minutes preceding this moment in the video. Make sure you understand that first. Once you understand that, then MPS is pretty easy. I think it's pretty easy. It's the change in saving divided by the change in disposable income. Okay? So in this example here, your MPS would be, how much money are you saving here? If you find $1,000 and you spend $300 of it, right? This is disposable income. I just happen to find it. So it's new disposable income for me. I spend $300, then I must be saving $700. So my disposable income goes up by $1,000. I save $700 of it. So my MPS is 0.7, meaning I am going to save 70 cents of the next dollar I earn. I'm going to save 70 cents of the next dollar I earn. And if you add MPS and MPC together, what are they going to equal? Right? In this case, they equal 1. And that's always got to be the case. This is saying that if you give me $1, I'm going to save or spend $1 of that money. I'm going to save and spend all of the money you've given me. Okay? It's got to be one or the other, spending or saving. So that's the logic behind MPC and MPS. So considering those 3 points that we discussed earlier on in this video, MPC will be greater than 0 and less than 1 for society as a whole. Because, remember, Keynes believed that for society as a whole, disposable income goes up, consumption goes up, but by a smaller amount. Meaning MPC is going to rise, but not fully. If MPC went just as far as income, it would be equal to 1, which is not possible for society as a whole. If it didn't go up at all, if it stayed exactly the same, income goes up and people don't spend any of it, then MPC would be 0. Not possible for society as a whole. So it's going to be somewhere between those two extremes according to Keynes. Okay, so let's get back to our formula here. You can see this is a pretty complicated chapter. There's a lot going on. We've still got a good bit to cover here. So here's our formula again. And we can use this formula at the macro or the micro level. I'm going to show you a micro level question simply because I think the logic makes more sense if you can put it on an individual basis. Because, right, we're used to dealing as individuals. We're not used to dealing as an economy. So let's say that that I earn $50,000 a year total. Okay, so that's all of the money I earn. Of that money, I have $35,000 in autonomous consumption. And my MPC is 0.8. What that would mean is, if my MPC is 0.8, is that I'm going to spend 80%. I'm going to spend 80%, not of all of my money, but I'm going to spend 80% of my disposable income. Okay? So solving for this here, my autonomous consumption is $35,000. So that's my money I spend automatically, right? That's the thing, you know, I'm paying for cable and rent and insurance, that sort of thing, automatically. And I've got some money left over, and of that money left over, I'm going to spend 80% of it, okay? So my disposable income is the money I have left over here. Started with 50 grand, spent 35 grand autonomously. So I've got 15 grand of disposable income. I've got 15 grand that I'm going to choose what I'm going to do with. And I've decided I'm going to spend 80% of that money, okay? And so my consumption here will come out to be $47,000. So that's my total consumption. And how much am I saving? Well, savings, okay, this is not a formula that I'm going to, dive into with great detail. Savings is simply just your income minus your consumption, right? Income minus consumption is your savings. I know my income is 50 grand. I know my consumption is 47,000. So I know my total savings is 3,000. Okay? If I want to think about this another way, what's my MPS? My MPS must be equal to 0.2, right? If my MPC is 0.8, my MPS has got to be 0.2 because they have to add up to 1. My MPS is 0.2 and my disposable income is 15,000. Then my savings equals my MPC times my disposable income. All right? I'm sorry, my MPS. In other words, if I'm saving 20% of my disposable income, so if I take those two values and multiply them together, I'll get my total savings, which would come out to $3,000. Okay, this can get pretty tough, and the big concern I see with students is when they see these types of questions, they say, and I have students come to my office and tell me this all the time, I have trouble with the math. You're not really having trouble with the math, okay? Because the math is the type of stuff you could have done in 5th grade. Multiplying, subtracting, adding, right? We're not doing anything fancy up here. If you're having trouble with the math, really what that means is you're having trouble with the understanding of the variables and what they mean, okay? So make sure you understand these concepts, do the practice problems, let me know if you need any help with the practice problems, and I can see what I can do to make things easier for you. And I guess I'm going to drop off here and move on to the next video. This is complicated. Do the practice problems and hang in there. I know our test is coming up.